All right. Do have audio. We got video. So we got a stream. Welcome back, everybody. I was planning on streaming Deus Ex the past couple days this week, Tuesday, and then today, Thursday. I just keep running out of time. Today I had a dental appointment, and we've got company coming over here in a little bit. And so Deus Ex it's still going. I just need to have a day land where I actually have the time to do it. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do episode 3 here of the Abolition of Man. We are in the first chapter. I found out that these were lectures that were given at the University of Durham. They were 3 lectures. It was a 3-part series. So we are in the first part of that series. What was that chapter called? It's not the way, and it's not the Abolition of Man. Men Without Chests. That's right. Okay, so once again, I want to tell you guys I am tweaking with the audio. I think this might be a good spot to have it. I thought the last one, the volume was too high. I was too loud. But hopefully it works out well. The other thing is we will be turning YouTube and Twitch off here in a little bit. That's more to allow me the freedom, the comfort level of being able to have whatever reactions that I want to have as I go through this. I've read this book before, but it's been a long time. Without the idea lurking in the back of my mind to self-censor. So because that has more to do with my reactions than it has to do with the book, I don't mind at all doing a summary before turning YouTube and Twitch off. But here pretty soon it is going to be exclusively on Rumble and on Kick. I will bring up the Be Right Back screen, which will have my URLs on them. Okay, let's try and do a quicker summary than I achieved in the last episode. This is a struggle area for me, but basically with Men Without Chests, what we're starting out with is a critique of a grammar book that C.S. Lewis codenames the Green Book, written by 2 authors that he gives pseudonyms in order to protect their identity. And he names them Gaius and Titius. And he does not like the content of their books, so he's critiquing it. And this is, so it starts out as an English critique of a grammar book, but it's leading to much larger things. And what we're dealing with here, I think, is subjectivism, which C.S. Lewis is very much against. As a reminder, this book was written in 1943, and it is remarkably on point for what we're dealing with today in 2023. So I think that's incredible, and that's why I'm doing a public reading of it. So let's go ahead and continue with the summary then. So the Green Book, Gaius and Titius, and Gaius and Titius write in their book. They bring a popular piece of literature and that has 2 tourists that are watching a waterfall. One calls it sublime and the other one pretty. And if I have this correct, there's an onlooker that listens to each one of them give their assessment, and he is disgusted with the description of the waterfall being pretty. And Gaius and Titius are proposing that what is really happening is that the one who commented that it was sublime wasn't really saying that the waterfall is sublime. Their position is that he can't say that. That what he's really saying is that he has sublime feelings in regards to the waterfall. And C.S. Lewis disagrees with this vehemently. And he says, Lewis says that they go on to say, we appear to be saying something very important. Gaius and Titius find this to be a common problem throughout all of language, and they say we appear to be saying something very important about something, and actually we are only saying something about our own feelings. C.S. Lewis goes on to point out how if you were to take that line of thought, it leads to obvious absurdities. So, for example, he brings up if the language that you're using to describe something is really just communicating how you feel about that something, then it leads to things such as when you say to somebody else, you are contemptible, it would actually mean I have contemptible feelings. Or your feelings are contemptible would mean my feelings are contemptible. And this becomes self-defeating, right? It's a self-contradiction. He goes on, C.S. Lewis goes on to indicate the negative consequences this has on the young schoolboy who is learning under this book. And he writes, the schoolboy who reads this passage in the Green Book will believe two propositions. Firstly, that all sentences containing a predicate of value are statements about the emotional state of the speaker. And secondly, that all such statements are unimportant. And he thinks that this has some really poor implications. So he goes on to write out, it is not a theory they put into the schoolboy's mind, but an assumption which 10 years hence, its origin forgotten and its presence unconscious, will condition him to take one side in a controversy which he has never recognized as a controversy at all. So he's what C.S. Lewis is ultimately arguing is the notion that there is no objective truth, that whenever you're using language to describe something, you can't really be saying that you're making a judgment on that something's value. You can only really be referencing your perception. I think I'm phrasing this the right way. Your feelings about it. This is some in our modern vernacular. We hear this all the time. Speak your truth. There is no such thing as your truth. There's just truth. And I've brought up before. I really like the phrase from Cloud Atlas where the woman says, "Truth is singular. Its versions are mistruth." So that's what C.S. Lewis is kicking back against here. So he then goes on to say that if Gaius and Titius were going to take this line of thinking, then it was their job to lay. I'm sorry. What Gaius and Titius do is they bring up another example, and it's a cheap advertisement for a voyage off to like the Indian Ocean or something. And C.S. Lewis is saying that if they're going to take this line of thinking and say, "Hey, look, all this is this just emotional." Statements from somebody, and they're throwaway statements because they're only speaking to that person's feelings on this subject matter, which C.S. Lewis thinks is incorrect. That's not what language is for. But if you're going to take that stance, then your job is to take the cheap advertisement and lay that side by side with well-written literature that is in maybe like the same kind of category to show why some forms of literature are cheap while others are noteworthy. And the way he says that is it was their business to put this advertisement side by side with passages from great writers in which the very emotion is well expressed and then show where the difference lies. Moving on, he goes on to say, from this passage, the schoolboy will learn about literature precisely nothing. What he will learn quickly enough, and perhaps indelibly, is the belief that all emotions aroused by local association are in themselves contrary to reason and contemptible. There are two ways of being immune to such an advertisement. This is important to understand, too. This is C.S. Lewis still talking. Two ways to be immune. Well, the sentence reads, he will have no notion that there are two ways of being immune to such an advertisement, that it falls equally flat on those who are above it and those who are below it, on the man of real sensibility and on the mere trousered ape who has never been able to conceive the Atlantic as anything more than so many millions tons of cold salt water. So C.S. Lewis is trying to point out that what the schoolboy is being led into is to kind of rubber stamp all of language as being, I suppose, somewhat useless when it comes to being able to accurately measure the value of a given thing. That it instead is emotional language that's kind of throwaway because, well, that's how you feel about it, but I feel differently. And that this is true of pretty much all of it. That's why I said rubber stamp, right? And C.S. Lewis is saying that robs the ability of language to be precise and for communication to occur, which is like a foundational pillar of civilization. That last part is that's me speaking, a foundational portion of civilization. But I believe Lewis would agree. So what he's saying here is that this advertisement, the way it's written, there are two kinds of people it won't have any impact on. The one who is educated well enough in understanding how to identify value and why it's valuable, why it would be meritocracy is what I'm wanting to say, why it would be a good statement, why it would be a good example of language. This kind of advertisement, he'll roll right by it because he knows. Think of us, like we're exposed to advertising all of the time. And by the time you're a certain age, there are commercials out there that have absolutely no impact on you because you can look at it and be like, yeah, that's a scam. Or it's not all it's cooked up to be, or et cetera, et cetera. But the other person that this will have no effect on is the person who already deems the thing to be of no value because they're kind of like uncultured or uncivilized. Lewis uses two terms, trousered ape and urban blockhead. And he's talking about people who they have no imagination. The idea, he is being, I guess, probably a little bit judgmental here, but he's trying to describe an idea. And this would be the person that would see absolutely no value in taking a voyage out into the ocean. Because all they see in the ocean is just a million tons of salt water. They see no other value in it. So an advertisement like this is lost on them as well. Okay, I spent way too long on that. Lewis again repeats the piece of information is, let's see, why the composition before them is bad when others that lie open to the same charge are good, the students do not hear. Okay, moving on. Oh, I thought this was pretty good. Lewis says that as a result of all of this, I guess the conclusion that would happen, the logical end, is that the students will receive. Okay, I need to set this up a little bit. He's talking about Gaius and Titius use another example where they bring up a piece of literature, like a book, where it talks about horses. Where was it? It's an anthropomorphic application to horses, and it claims that they are eagerly ready to help with the colonization effort in Australia, basically. And Gaius and Titius are pointing out how this is a ridiculous statement because horses are not going to have those kinds of feelings, right? And C.S. Lewis is pointing out that in itself is a ridiculous observation because what are we going to do? Throw out every classic piece of literature in which we applied anthropomorphism or we talked about great horses like those of Achilles and stuff like that. So with that in mind, what his summary is he says that when you're able to push the students down this road of thought, that there is no value in something like anthropomorphism, then the result is some pleasure in their own ponies and dogs they will have lost. Some incentive to cruelty or neglect they will have received. And some pleasure in their own knowingness will have entered their minds. Moving on, for every one pupil who needs to be guarded from a weak excess of sensibility, there are 3 who need to be awakened from the slumber of cold vulgarity. The task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts.
This was written as he was trying to find what he felt like were Gaius and Titius's most motivating factors, and he felt like they in 1943 it was being noticed that there was a lot of emotional appeals happening, which can be harmful, right? That's one of the best ways you could get got is through emotional appeals, because particularly emotional appeals devoid of logic. But he's warning that if you try and just completely axe that off and just get rid of all emotion completely and not educate the students in it, not even go over it, but instead kind of warn them about it without showing them signs of where emotion is used in a positive way, then you're setting them. He's saying that he says that for every one pupil that he's run into that needed to be guarded from an excess of sentimentality or sensibility, there were 3 who needed to be awakened from the slumber of cold vulgarity, right? And he says the task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. Then this part was real important too. He says in the next paragraph, until quite modern times, which for him is 1943, all teachers and even all men believed the universe to be such that certain emotional reactions on our part could be either congruous or incongruous to it. Believed, in fact, that objects did not merely receive but could merit our approval or disapproval, our reverence or our contempt. And he's right here directly commenting on this new trend that was called, I said the word earlier, subjectivity, right? We know it well these days. Like every time you hear somebody speak your truth, say speak your truth, that's what they're referencing. That they maybe unwittingly, this is so prevalent in our culture. I don't even think people understand that they've been, I don't know if the right word is indoctrinated, but it's the one that comes to mind, that they've been indoctrinated into an ideology. It's a theory, it's a worldview. And this worldview revolves around the idea that there is no such thing as objective truth, that everything is subjective. And this is where you get a lot of feelings-based things and emotion-based things where they will reject, how would I phrase this? I guess the scientifically accurate, cold, hard facts of the matter in favor of how they feel internally more, right? And then in order to do that, then they have to kind of reshape the world and get a lot of society to go along with that. So there then becomes this big push to kind of reject reality and instead say reality is just a construct within your own mind, and so it's different for everybody. So don't be so judgy, right? That's what we're dealing with now. And so I'll read that one more time. Until quite modern times, all teachers and even all men believed the universe to be such that certain emotional reactions on our part, now that's key, certain emotional reactions on our part could be either congruous or incongruous to it. Believed, in fact, that objects did not merely receive but could merit our approval or disapproval, our reverence, or our contempt. In other words, you could objectively say something was good or something was bad. And I don't usually like absolutes, so maybe you wouldn't say like it's that way 100% of the time, but most of the time, right? So then he moves on. When the age for, he's talking about the students here, if you have educated them correctly, which is, he's appealing to classical education, and he believes that you want to teach your students how to order their affections correctly. And I use the example of you should love your wife more than you love chocolate as an example, right? You should value mankind's survival over over a rare slug that shuts down building on 25 acres of land. That would be my take. Other people are going to disagree with that. Right? And you could kind of probably have arguments on both sides. But that's what C.S. Lewis is recommending, is that students are best served by teaching them how to order their affections in a correct top to bottom order, so that, and here's where I'm quoting from the book, when the age for reflective thought comes, the pupil who has been thus trained in ordinate affections or just sentiments will easily find the first principles in ethics. But to the corrupt man, they will never be visible at all, and he can make no progress in that science. That's a really key point. That's probably the biggest part of this first section. So he then goes on. We're about to wrap up the summary here. I'm really close to it, but this part is really important because it's going to play a role in the rest of the book. He goes on to talk about how you can find a general similarity of prioritization for good things. Ooh, boy, I'm having a hard time thinking of how to phrase this. Of virtues, of virtuous characteristics. You can find a pretty matching set of ideals across multiple cultures, multiple timelines, not timelines, but like eras. And so if that's the case, you can probably pretty much guess that that's true. If you have different people from different cultures, and also in addition to that, whole different eras that are agreeing, for example, murder is bad, then you can pretty much assume that that's kind of true for all of humanity. That's an objective truth. So he writes about that, and this is where he's getting to what he calls the Tao. He writes, in early Hinduism, that conduct in men which can be called good consists in conformity to or almost participation in the Rita. Okay, so that's for Hinduism. And what is the Rita? The Rita is constantly identified with Satya, or truth. I'm assuming Satya and Rita must be Indian names. This is Hinduism, right? Satya would be the Indian name for truth. The English word would be truth. And then he goes on. I should read that again. Rita is constantly identified with Satya, or truth, correspondence to reality. Correspondence to reality. That's a really big key component there, because we're struggling with that right now a little bit, sort of unbelievably. I think that some of the arguments happening within society are absolutely absurd, that it shouldn't even be an argument. There are some of these things, these positions, that are beyond ridiculous. They're insane, so moving on. This conception in all its forms. So he goes on and he lists several different people across different eras. So he lists the forms here: Platonic, Aristotelian, Stoic, Christian, and Oriental alike. I shall henceforth refer to, for brevity, simply as the Tao. So what is the Tao? It's this conception. What is the conception? The Chinese also speak of a great thing called the Tao. It is the reality beyond all predicates, the abyss that was before the Creator himself. It is nature. It is the way, the road. It is the way in which the universe goes on, the way in which things everlastingly emerge, stilly and tranquilly into space and time. It is also the way which every man should tread in imitation of that cosmic and supercosmic progression, conforming all activities to that great exemplar. In ritual, say the Analects, it is harmony with nature that is prized. The ancient Jews likewise praised the law, capital L, as being true. So I think another word that you could use, the concept that he's getting at, is there is such a thing as reality. And to break from that and start fabricating your own reality is to get out of step with the universe, which will lead to absolutely disastrous consequences. That just like when you're firing your rifle downrange at a target, if you're off by a millimeter at the position that you're at with the rifle, you're off by 4 inches or more downrange. And the further downrange you go, the more off you are. That's a good illustration, in my opinion, about if you start with something that is not grounded in truth and it does not correspond to reality, then the further down the road you take that line of thought, the worse and worse and worse the implications and outcomes get. So that's what C.S. Lewis is driving at here, and it's important for us to understand that for the rest of this book. And he goes on, he says, it is the doctrine of objective value, the belief that certain attitudes are really true and others really false to the kind of thing the universe is and the kind of things we are. And then the last thing I have here is he says, no emotion is in itself a judgment. In that sense, all emotions and sentiments are illogical, but they can be reasonable or unreasonable as they conform to reason or fail to conform. The heart never takes the place of the head, but it can and should obey it. I think another way to sum that up is that you may feel a certain way about something, or you feel a certain way internally, that would be your heart, right? But if that breaks with the logic and the facts of reality that your brain is able to interpret, then you're putting yourself on one really horrible road of existence that there's going to be enormous fallout from. I think that's kind of that's the concept C.S. Lewis is getting at, is that these two things need to be in harmony with each other. You can't just completely overrule one with the other. And it's the head that should lead. That would be his position. Okay, so we are now getting ready to finish up this chapter. We only have 3 pages to go to finish up Men Without Chests. But I was doing a little bit of reading on this earlier today, and this is where it starts to get, in my opinion at least, a little bit complex and potentially confusing. I had some trouble with parts of it. I didn't feel like I understood the overall paper because I remember reading this before, and I was impressed with it, right? But when you get into individual paragraphs, there are times where I'm like, I'm not quite sure what you mean there, and I think there might be some of that here. But we're going to go ahead and turn YouTube and Twitch off. Here is the Be Right Back screen. Up at the top left, you will find my Rumble HTML, I believe it is. And at the top right is Kick. So glance at those, pause it if you want to so that you can get those addresses if you're really interested in continuing to follow along with this. But I will be at Rumble and Kick exclusively at this point in time. We are now turning YouTube and Twitch off.